She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even knock on the door. Celine Viscari simply stood in the rain outside her own penthouse, holding an ultrasound photo against her chest, and watched through a half-open door as her husband kissed another woman in the bed they had shared for 3 years. The woman laughed at something Damien whispered. He pulled her closer. And Celine, 8 weeks pregnant, soaking wet, still wearing the dress she had bought specifically for the surprise she had planned, turned around and walked back into the elevator. She pressed the lobby button, the doors closed, and she made a decision that would shake the foundations of an empire. If you've ever loved someone who didn't deserve it, stay with me. Because this story is about what happens when a woman decides she is worth more than the life someone else built for her. Before we begin, if this is your first time here, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if something in this hits close to home, hit that like button. Now let's get into it. The penthouse at Meridian Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, and on clear nights you could see the entire city laid out below, like something God had arranged specifically for Damien Viscari's approval. He liked standing at those windows. He liked knowing that most of what he could see, the freight companies, the waterfront warehouses, the private financial firms with their tinted glass and hushed interiors, existed because of agreements he had made in rooms most people never got to enter. He was 34 years old. He had united 3 competing crime syndicates under one organizational structure through a combination of strategic marriage, calculated intimidation, and a gift for making men believe that cooperation with him was simply the smarter option. Nobody called him a criminal to his face, not twice. And he had married Celine Arden 2 years before because she was the only person he had ever met who looked at him without calculation. She didn't want his money. She had her own, modest, earned honestly, nothing compared to his, but hers. She didn't want access to his influence. She worked as a corporate systems analyst and seemed genuinely uninterested in the world he moved through. What she wanted, as far as Damien could ever figure out, was simply him. The version of himself he showed only when no one else was watching. The version that sometimes sat on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. eating cereal out of the box because he couldn't sleep and didn't want to wake her. That was the version she had fallen in love with. He had told himself for 2 years that he deserved her. He was wrong. The night Celine came home with the ultrasound photos, she had been planning the surprise for 3 weeks. She had rehearsed what she would say. She had bought a tiny pair of shoes, so small they fit in the palm of her hand, that she intended to leave on his desk beside the photos. She had even written a note, kept it short because Damien never responded well to long speeches. "We're 3 now. I thought you should know." She had been nervous the whole drive home. Not about his reaction. She knew him well enough to know he would be stunned, then overcome, then completely insufferable about it for weeks. She was nervous the way you're nervous before something wonderful happens, the physical anticipation of joy. The lobby security guard had nodded at her. The elevator had been slow. She remembered thinking, standing in that elevator, that she was the luckiest woman she knew. The penthouse door was not fully closed. Damien had a habit of not latching it when he was expecting staff to bring something up. She pushed it open slowly, already reaching into her bag for the shoes, already composing her face into something that held the secret for a few more seconds. She heard the woman's laugh before she saw anything. She stopped moving, and then she saw. The woman's name was Irina Vasek. Celine recognized her. Damien had introduced them at a charity function 8 months earlier. A former business associate, he had said, someone from the early years. Irina was tall, dark-haired, the kind of composed and polished that suggested money worn so long it had become invisible. She had shaken Celine's hand that night and smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Celine had thought nothing of it at the time. She thought about it now. She stood in the doorway for what felt like a long time, but was probably fewer than 10 seconds. Long enough to confirm what she was seeing was real. Long enough for every nervous, joyful, anticipatory feeling she had been carrying all evening to go completely, utterly quiet. She did not make a sound. She pulled the door back to where it had been, turned around, and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside, and the doors closed. And she stood there holding the ultrasound photos, and the tiny shoes, and the note she had written, and she felt the elevator descend, and she thought, with a clarity that surprised her, I will not cry in this elevator. I will not cry until I am somewhere safe, and then I will figure out what comes next. She did not cry in the elevator. What came next took 12 hours to arrange. Celine had resources Damien didn't know about because she had never told him about them. Not as a strategy, simply because some parts of her life existed before him, and she had seen no reason to hand them over. A former colleague named Margot, who now ran a relocation consulting firm and had helped 3 other women disappear from difficult situations, owed her a favor that had gone uncollected for 4 years. Celine called in that favor at 3 in the morning. She called from a payphone 2 miles from the apartment she kept in her own name. Another thing Damien didn't know about, not because she was hiding it, but because he had never thought to ask where she went when she needed to think, and she had never volunteered it. The apartment was small, barely furnished, with a kitchen table and a single window that faced a brick wall. She had always found it calming. She sat at that kitchen table with the ultrasound photos face down in front of her, and she did not sleep, and she did not eat anything, and she called Margot and she said simply, I need to leave and I need it to be complete. Margot, to her credit, did not ask questions. She said, how long do you need? And Celine said, 12 hours. And Margot said, be at this address by 7. At 6:45, Celine washed her face, packed the single bag she kept in the apartment for reasons she had never examined too closely, and walked out. She left the tiny shoes on the kitchen table. She took the ultrasound photos. She did not leave a note for Damien. She had spent 3 weeks composing the perfect words for the best moment of her life. She found she had nothing to say about this one. Damien noticed she was gone at 9 that morning. He noticed because the penthouse was quiet in a particular way. Not empty quiet, but wrong quiet. The way a room feels when something that should be there isn't. He had come out of the bedroom expecting coffee and the particular low sound of Celine moving through the kitchen, and instead there was nothing, and the feeling that settled over him before he even fully understood what he was registering was dread. He checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the study, the rooftop terrace. He called her cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He told himself she had gone out early, maybe to see a friend, maybe for a walk. Celine had phases where she needed to walk. He made coffee. He drank half of it. He called again, and this time the number no longer connected. Not voicemail, just nothing, like the line had been cut from the other end. He stood in his kitchen holding the phone, and he thought about the night before, and for the first time in a long time, Damien Vescari felt something he had spent years systematically eliminating from his emotional range. He felt afraid. By noon, his people had checked every hospital, every hotel, every address associated with Celine Arden that he knew about. Nothing. By evening, a man named Corso, who had been with Damien for 11 years and had never failed to locate a missing person when instructed to, came back with an expression that told the story before he opened his mouth. She's gone, Corso said. Clean, professional. Whoever helped her knew what they were doing. Damien sat very still for a moment. She had help. Yes. Find who helped her. Corso hesitated. Damien, if she went to this kind of trouble to disappear, find who helped her. Each word landed separately. Corso didn't argue again. It took 3 weeks to trace the relocation consultant. By then the woman, Margot Ellison, it turned out, a name Damien had never encountered before, had covered every track with a thoroughness that suggested she had done this many times. She had moved Celine through 4 different transit routes. She had arranged new documentation. She had, in the assessment of Damien's best investigator, performed what amounted to a complete identity exit. When his men finally located Margot Ellison in a city 200 miles away and brought her to speak with him, she sat across the table from Damien with an expression of complete calm and said, I helped a woman who wanted to not be found. I don't know where she is now, and I wouldn't tell you if I did. Damien looked at her for a long time. She was my wife, he said. I know, Margot said. She told me. And you still helped her leave. She didn't ask me why she needed to go, Margot said. And I didn't ask her. That's not how this works. He had her escorted out. He didn't hurt her. Not because he was above it. He had done worse things to people who had crossed him. But because somewhere in the part of him that had loved Celine, He understood that Margot Ellison had simply done what he had made necessary. The sin was his. Punishing the instrument of its consequence would have been cheap, even for him. He sat in that room alone for a long time after she left. He thought about the night before Celine disappeared, about Irina, about the door that hadn't been fully closed. The thought landed in his chest like something falling from a great height. She saw. He had never considered it. In the desperate, panicked weeks of searching, he had constructed a dozen explanations for her disappearance. A breakdown, a threat from someone targeting him through her, a misunderstanding of some kind. It had not occurred to him, or perhaps he had refused to let it occur to him, that she might have left for the simplest possible reason. She had seen exactly what he was, and she had decided she would rather vanish than stay. That realization broke something in him that his organization and his lawyers and his investigators and all of his money could not fix. He searched for 2 more years, not as obsessively as the first months. Life and business imposed their demands, and Damien was too practical to collapse entirely, but consistently, persistently, with the particular desperation of a man who cannot accept that a door has been closed to him. He hired 3 different private investigation firms. He offered rewards through intermediaries. He maintained a network of observers in 12 cities. Nothing. Celine Arden, whoever she was now, wherever she was, had ceased to exist in any form he could reach. He thought about her differently as time passed, less about the betrayal he owed her, which he could not bring himself to fully examine, and more about the things he had never said. He had not told her he loved her nearly enough. He had treated her reliability as background, something he could count on and therefore didn't need to consider. He had given her everything except his actual attention. He thought about her laugh, the way she argued, not to win, but to understand. The particular silence she got when she was turning something over in her mind. The fact that she had been the only person he ever ate cereal with at 2 a.m. He thought about all of this at strange moments, during board meetings, in the back of cars on the way to things that had once seemed important. At the windows of the penthouse he still lived in because leaving it felt like admitting she was never coming back. Grief is strange. It doesn't always know it's grief. Sometimes it pretends to be anger or routine or the ordinary business of getting through a day. Damien had spent 3 years not recognizing what he was carrying as grief because he had told himself that grief was for people who had lost something they had no part in destroying. He had destroyed this himself. He had no right to mourn it. He mourned it anyway. The International Business Summit in Geneva was the largest of its kind in a decade. 700 delegates from 42 countries, 3 days of panels and negotiations, and the kind of organized networking that Damien had always found mildly contemptible but attended because certain conversations only happened in rooms like these. He was there for a specific infrastructure contract, a multi-billion-dollar regional security modernization project that his legitimate holdings, the side of his empire that existed in daylight, had been positioning for 18 months to acquire. His legal team was confident. His numbers were strong. The only serious competing bid had come from a technology firm called Arden Security Group, which had appeared in the industry about 4 years earlier and grown with startling speed into one of the most respected names in corporate security infrastructure. He knew nothing particular about Arden Security Group other than that they were formidable and that their CEO, known in business circles as Seraphine Arden, was considered something of a phenomenon, relentless, brilliant, nearly impossible to outmaneuver in a negotiation. He was standing at the edge of the main conference hall on the first morning, half listening to a conversation beside him, when he looked up. She was across the room. Dark coat, dark hair pulled back, a posture he would have recognized in a photograph taken from a mile away. His heart stopped, completely. One full beat simply did not happen. He thought he was imagining it. He had imagined her before, in airports, in restaurants, in the backs of crowds. And every time the woman had turned around and been a stranger, and he had felt the particular small humiliation of a man betrayed by his own longing. But this woman did not turn around. She stood speaking with 2 men in suits, a tablet in one hand, gesturing at something on the screen with the calm authority of someone who has long since stopped being nervous in rooms full of powerful people. And then she turned her head slightly, not toward him, just repositioning in the conversation, and he saw her profile. Every nerve in his body went silent. It was Celine. Not the Celine who had left, softer, quieter, still learning the dimensions of the world she was entering. This was someone who had taken that woman apart and rebuilt her from the inside. The lines of her face were the same, but her expression was different in a way he couldn't immediately name. Not cold exactly, not hard, more like settled, like someone who has survived a difficult thing and stopped being surprised by difficulty. She hadn't seen him yet. He stood completely still and watched her and thought, with a clarity that cut through 5 years of grief and guilt and desperate searching. She is the CEO of Arden Security Group. She built this. She built all of this while I was looking for her. He took one step forward, and at that exact moment, Celine Arden, or Seraphine as the world now knew her, turned and looked directly across the conference hall, and her eyes found his. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. Then she looked back at the men she was speaking with, nodded at something one of them said, and continued the conversation as though nothing had happened, as though he were no one, as though 5 years and a disappeared marriage and a search that had consumed the edges of every year since had simply not mattered. Damien Vescari, who had not been afraid of anything in 15 years, stood in the middle of a crowded conference hall and felt the floor shift beneath him. She was alive. She was here. She was extraordinary. And she had just looked him in the eye and looked away. That was the moment he understood, with a completeness that no amount of searching had ever given him, exactly what he had lost. Not a wife, not a marriage, the only person who had ever seen him clearly and chosen him anyway. And she had made her choice again, right in front of him, in under 3 seconds, without a single word. She had chosen to make him no one. He gave her 40 minutes. That was how long it took Damien to pull himself together enough to cross the room. 40 minutes of standing near the window with a glass of water he didn't drink, watching her move through the conference hall with the ease of someone who owned every space she walked into. She spoke to 6 different people in that time. She laughed once, briefly, at something a silver-haired delegate said. She checked her tablet twice, made a small notation, and slid it back under her arm without breaking eye contact with whoever she was speaking to. She did not look at him again. Not once. He walked toward her when she broke away from the silver-haired man and was moving alone toward the registration tables. His legs worked fine. His breathing was the problem. Too shallow, slightly wrong, like a man who has been underwater and hasn't fully adjusted to air yet. Celine. She stopped. One beat. Then she turned and her face was completely composed. Mr. Vescari. Her voice was the same. Slightly lower, maybe. Or maybe that was just him projecting something onto the air between them. I wasn't sure you'd recognized me. I recognized you from across the room. Then you have better eyesight than I gave you credit for. She shifted the tablet to her other arm. Are you here for the Meridian contract? He stared at her. That's the first thing you want to say to me. It's a relevant business question. Celine, Seraphine, she said. Not sharply, just a correction, delivered the way you'd correct someone who'd mispronounced a street name. I go by Seraphine now. Most people here know me that way. I'm not most people. Something moved in her eyes. It was there for less than a second, and then it was gone, replaced by an expression of professional pleasantness that was so perfectly calibrated it was almost frightening. No, she said, you're not. You're also my primary competition for the largest contract either of us has ever bid on, which makes this conversation technically a conflict of interest. She glanced past him briefly, not rudely, just checking the room. We should probably keep our interactions professional while we're both here, don't you think? He couldn't speak for a moment. I looked for you, he said, for 3 years. I know. She met his eyes. That's why I made sure you couldn't find me. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Excuse me, I have a pre-session meeting in 4 minutes. She walked past him. He turned and watched her go. She didn't look back. Her heels on the marble floor were even and unhurried, and she stopped to shake hands with someone near the corridor entrance and smiled at whatever they said, and then she turned the corner and was gone. Damien stood very still in the middle of the conference hall and thought, she prepared for this. She knew he might be here. She had her answer ready, her posture ready, her exit ready. She had thought this through and she had decided exactly what he was going to be allowed to have, which was nothing, and she had executed that decision with a calm so complete it made his chest hurt in a way he hadn't felt since the first weeks after she disappeared. He had spent 5 years imagining this moment. In every version he had ever imagined, she cried. or screamed, or let him explain. He had not imagined this. The pre-session panel on regional infrastructure security seated 40 people around a horseshoe table, and by some arrangement that Damien suspected was not accidental, he and Seraphine Arden were placed 9 seats apart on opposite sides. He watched her across the table. She took notes by hand. He hadn't known she did that. The Celine he had married typed everything. She asked 2 questions during the session, both precise, both exposing small weaknesses in the moderator's assumptions that the moderator then had to spend time walking back. The man to her left leaned over twice to say something to her, and both times she responded without looking up from her notes. After the session, a man named Reyes, one of Damien's senior legal advisors, who had flown in specifically for this summit, fell into step beside him in the corridor. "That's her," Reyes said. It wasn't a question. "Don't. Damien, if she's the competing bidder on Meridian, I said don't." Reyes was quiet for 3 steps. "Her firm is strong. Their security infrastructure proposal has been circulating for 2 weeks. 3 of the committee members have already met with her people. Her numbers are very good." "I know what her numbers are. I reviewed the competing bids." "Did you know it was her?" Damien didn't answer. Reyes exhaled slowly through his nose. "This is a complication. It's a business competition. Handle it like one." "I'm not the one who needs to hear that." Damien stopped walking. Reyes stopped a half step later, and the 2 men looked at each other in the way of people who have worked together long enough that certain conversations don't need full sentences. "I'm fine," Damien said. Reyes looked at him. "Sure," he said, and said nothing else, which was worse. The evening reception was held in the summit's glass-walled dining hall, and it was the kind of event where the real negotiations happened. Not at the table, but in the spaces between tables, in the 10-minute conversations beside the bar, in the careful choreography of who spoke to whom and for how long and in what order. Damien was good at these events. He had been doing them for 15 years. He knew how to make men feel seen, how to let them talk themselves into things they hadn't planned to agree to, how to make the exit from a conversation feel like their idea. Tonight he was off his rhythm, and he knew it. He spent 40 minutes working the room with a performance of his usual self, laughing at the right moments, asking the right questions, standing in the right way. And underneath all of it, underneath every handshake and every strategic pleasantry, he was tracking her. She was on the far side of the room with a small group that included 2 committee members. She was listening more than speaking, which he remembered was how she operated when she was in full assessment mode, collecting information, sorting it, deciding which pieces mattered. At some point, she broke away from the group and went to the bar alone. He crossed the room. She saw him coming and ordered a sparkling water, and when he stopped beside her, she said, without turning her head, "Is this going to become a pattern this week?" "Probably." He ordered a whiskey he didn't particularly want. "You look well." "Thank you." "I mean it. Whatever you've been doing, working." She picked up her water. "Raising my son, running a company, the usual." The word landed in his sternum like a stone dropped from height. "Your son." She looked at him then. Really looked, for the first time since the conference hall that morning, and what he saw in her eyes in that moment was not anger. It was a kind of careful watching, the look of someone who is prepared for a bomb to go off and is monitoring the exact moment of detonation. "I have a 5-year-old son," she said. Her voice was steady. "His name is Lucien." The math was not difficult. Damien had always been good at math. He set his glass down on the bar because his hand was not entirely reliable, and he didn't want her to see that. He thought about the ultrasound photos he had learned about much later, learned about from Margot Ellison, 2 years after Celine disappeared, during a second conversation he had requested and she had reluctantly agreed to. Margot had told him simply that Celine had been pregnant when she left. She had said it without drama, stating a fact. Damien had sat with that information for 3 years, turning it over, carrying it, unable to do anything with it because Celine was still unfindable. He had a son. He had a 5-year-old son he had never met. "Is he—" His voice came out wrong. He stopped, started again. "Is he with you here?" "He's at the hotel, with his nanny." She watched him. "He's fine. He's healthy. He's extraordinary, actually, but I'm his mother, so I'm not exactly objective." "Celine, Seraphine, stop doing that." The words came out with more force than he intended. A couple nearby glanced over and Damien made himself lower his voice. Stop using that name with me. I know who you are. You knew who I was, she said. You stopped knowing when you made the choices you made. She set her water glass down. I don't say that to be cruel. It's just accurate. I need you to let me explain. Damien. She said his name quietly, and something in the way she said it, not cold, just final, the way you say a word when you are closing a book, stopped him completely. I don't need an explanation. I know what I saw. I've had 5 years to understand it. I made my peace with it. A breath. What I need from you this week is for you to compete fairly for this contract and to not make things complicated. That's all. And Lucy Champ? The question sat between them. She was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the question, processing it, the way she always processed things she hadn't fully decided yet. Lucien doesn't know about you, she said. I told him his father wasn't part of our lives. I didn't tell him you were a bad person. I didn't tell him anything that would make him afraid. She paused. I built a life where he doesn't need to carry something I didn't know how to explain. He deserves to know. Something shifted in her face. Not anger, closer to exhaustion, the kind that comes not from tiredness, but from having had a version of this argument inside your own head for years. He deserves a father who was there, she said. You weren't. And the reason you weren't… She picked up her water again, a small contained gesture that said the conversation was moving toward its close. That's not his fault, and it's not mine. I didn't know. I know you didn't know. That doesn't change what was happening in your penthouse the night I came home to surprise you. Her voice remained even, but something at the edge of it tightened. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I had tiny shoes in my bag. I had a note I'd spent 3 weeks writing. She looked at him directly. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you so you understand that I didn't disappear out of spite. I disappeared because staying would have broken something in me that Lucien needed whole. Damien had nothing to say. There was nothing adequate. He knew it. Go get some sleep, she said, not unkindly. We have a committee presentation tomorrow morning, and you look like you've seen a ghost. She walked away from the bar. He stood there with his untouched whiskey and felt 43 years old in a way he had never felt before. Not old, but used up, scraped hollow by his own history, standing at the edge of something he had no tools to fix. He didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed at 2 a.m. with the city lights coming through the curtains and thought about a boy named Lucien who was somewhere in this same building, sleeping in a room down some corridor, who had his mother's name and no father and 5 years of a life that Damien had no part in. He thought about what he owed that child. He thought about what he owed Celine. He thought about Irina Vasek, which he hadn't let himself do in a long time, because that particular memory had a way of making him feel something close to physical nausea. He picked up his phone and called Corso. I need everything we have on Irina Vasek, he said when Corso answered. Not the old files. I need you to go back further. Find out who she was in contact with in the 18 months before… He stopped. Started again. Before my wife left. Who she was meeting with. Who was paying her. Whether anyone inside the organization was in contact with her. Corso was quiet for a moment. That's a specific request. Yes. You think someone set it up? I think I've been too lazy about asking why it happened. He looked at the city lights. I was too busy being guilty. Start digging. This opens something up, Damien. If there are people inside who are running plays without your authorization, then I need to know. He paused. Don't tell anyone you're looking. Nobody. Not Reyes, not Fabrini. Nobody. Understood. A beat. Is she really there? Yes. And she built something that could take this contract away from us. He exhaled. She's also got a son, 5 years old. The silence on the other end of the call lasted long enough to be its own answer. All right, Corso said quietly. I'll start tonight. The contract presentation the next morning was scheduled for 9 o'clock in a sleek, windowless committee room on the 4th floor, and both teams arrived at the same time, which produced a brief, awkward moment in the corridor outside where Damien's 3-person legal team and Seraphine's 4-person team occupied the same 10 feet of hallway, waiting for the doors to open. She nodded at him, professionally. He nodded back. One of her people said, A young woman with a sharp haircut and the alert eyes of someone who runs on competitive instinct, looked between them and then at her boss with a slightly raised eyebrow. Seraphine didn't look back. Inside the room, the presentations went in alphabetical order. Arden Security Group presented first. Damien watched her present. She was extraordinary. He had known she was smart. He had always known that. But smart and this were two different things. She had a way of preempting committee concerns before they were raised, of framing her company's weaknesses as deliberate choices rather than gaps, of making the committee members feel that whatever question they were about to ask had already been considered and incorporated. She spoke for 22 minutes without notes. The committee chair asked 3 follow-up questions, and she answered all 3 without hedging. When she sat down, the committee chair said, "Ms. Arden, that was genuinely impressive." And she said, "Thank you. We think the work speaks for itself." Damien's presentation was good. His team was prepared, his numbers were solid, his infrastructure proposals were arguably more comprehensive. But the room had a temperature when he walked up to present that it hadn't had before him, a particular kind of stillness that told him Seraphine had already made an impression he was now working against. He got through it. His team was professional, the questions were fair. But when the session broke for lunch, Reyes fell into step beside him and said quietly, "We need to find a way to differentiate. She's got the committee leaning." "I know. We could push the legacy infrastructure angle, our existing relationships with—" "I know what we have, Marcus." He pushed through the corridor door. "Give me a minute." He found an empty alcove near the stairwell and stood there and pressed the back of his head against the wall and breathed. He was not losing this contract to her. Not because he couldn't stand losing to her. He could, or he thought he could. But because losing this contract would destabilize the legitimate side of his holdings at a moment when the criminal infrastructure beneath it was already under internal pressure. Corso had called that morning with a preliminary answer that made the ground feel less solid under everything. Irina Vasek's phone records from 5 years ago showed 6 calls in the week before that night. 6 calls to a number registered to a shell company that traced back with some effort to a man named Drago Fabrini. Fabrini, who had been with the organization for 20 years, who sat on Damien's inner council, who had shaken Damien's hand at the funeral of a mutual associate 3 months ago, and looked him in the eye. He pressed harder against the wall. If Fabrini had arranged Irina, had orchestrated the night Celine came home to, then what Damien had spent 5 years calling his own failure was something else entirely. Not only his failure, something done to him, something done to Celine, something that had stolen a marriage and a child in 5 years and had been sitting inside his organization this whole time, smiling at him across tables. The rage came in slowly, which was the worst kind. Fast rage burned itself out. Slow rage settled into the bones and stayed. He thought about Celine in that conference room, so composed, so completely sufficient without him. He thought about a boy named Lucien asleep in a hotel room. He thought about the tiny shoes she had never described to him, that Margot had mentioned only in passing, that Celine had apparently left behind on a kitchen table in an apartment he'd never known about. He thought about Drago Fabrini's face. He pushed off the wall and went back to the corridor. He needed this contract. He needed the resources it would provide. He needed the legitimacy it would signal to the parts of his organization that were watching to see whether he was still untouchable. And he needed Seraphine Arden to understand, at some point, not now, not like this, that what had happened between them was not entirely the story she had been telling herself for 5 years. That the betrayal she had walked away from had been built by someone with a plan. That he had been a fool. A willing fool, perhaps. He would never argue otherwise. He had made the choice that night. No one had forced him. But someone had arranged the choice, had placed the pieces and then stood back to watch them fall. And that someone was still inside his organization. Still inside the structure that Seraphine's own company was now being targeted by. 3 cyber attacks in the past 4 months, she had mentioned briefly during a committee-side conversation he had been close enough to overhear, attributed to competitors, still under investigation. The thought arrived with a cold clarity that cut through everything else. The attacks on Arden Security Group were not from random competitors. They were from the same people who had destroyed the marriage. The same people who had watched Celine disappear and decided that whatever threat she represented to their control of Damien had been eliminated, and who were now watching her return, powerful, unassailable, The one person capable of unsettling Damien in ways no rival could, and deciding to finish what they had started 5 years ago. He stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the corridor with delegates moving past him on both sides, and the lunch conversation buzzing at a low frequency around him, and he understood, with a completeness that felt like cold water poured over his head, that Seraphine Arden was in danger. Not business danger, not competition danger, the kind of danger that came from people who had decided she needed to disappear. Permanently, this time. And she didn't know it. She was sitting in a glass-walled dining hall somewhere in this building, composed and sufficient and completely certain that the worst thing that could happen to her this week was losing a contract to the man who had ruined her marriage. She had no idea what was coming. He pulled out his phone and called Corso again. "How quickly can you get here?" he said when it connected. "Geneva?" Corso's voice was careful. 12 hours, maybe 10 if I push." "Push," he lowered his voice. "And pull everything we have on recent activity near Arden Security Group. Cyber attacks, physical surveillance, anything that looks like prep work. Cross-reference with anything touching Fabrini in the last 6 months. You think they're targeting her? I think they never stopped." He walked faster. "And Corso, she cannot know I'm doing this. If she finds out I'm running surveillance adjacent to her people, she'll think you're the threat." "Yes." A silence. "This is getting complicated, Damien." He pushed through the door at the end of the corridor into the stairwell, where the noise dropped away and there was just the sound of his own footsteps and his own breathing, and the quiet weight of a situation that had just shifted from painful to dangerous. "It's been complicated for 5 years," he said. "I just didn't know it." He ended the call. He stood in the stairwell and thought about the next move, and the move after that, and the particular problem of protecting a woman who would not allow him within arm's reach. Above him, somewhere in this building, Seraphine Arden was having lunch, and not knowing that the people who had taken her marriage were now deciding whether to take Corso arrived in 9 hours and 40 minutes. He came through the hotel's service entrance at 11:30 at night, carrying a single bag and the expression of a man who had spent the flight reading things that had made him very unhappy. Damien met him in the narrow corridor outside the hotel laundry room because it was the one place in the building with no cameras and no reason for anyone to be walking past. Corso put the bag down and opened it on a folding shelf between 2 linen carts and said, without preamble, "It's worse than you thought." "Show me." Corso pulled out a tablet and a manila folder, which was old-fashioned but which both of them still trusted more than digital files for things that couldn't be recovered from. He opened the folder first. Printed phone records. Transaction logs. A photograph of a woman leaving a building that Damien recognized as one of Fabrini's legitimate office addresses. The woman was Irina Vasek. The date stamp on the photograph was 14 months before the night Celine disappeared. They were coordinating for over a year, Corso said. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't Fabrini taking an opportunity. He built the whole thing. He identified Irina from the early days. She and you had a history. He knew that. He approached her about 8 months before the end and made her an offer. Corso paused. She was paid, Damien. A significant amount. The relationship she resumed with you was a transaction. The word transaction sat in the space between them. Damien looked at the photograph. He looked at the date stamp. He thought about 14 months of orchestration. 14 months of someone inside his organization building a structure designed to destroy the one thing in his life that was not about power or fear or calculation. What was Fabrini's concern? His voice was very flat. The flatness was not calm. It was the thing underneath calm, the thing that only came out when he had moved through anger and out the other side into something colder. Celine, Corso said it simply. Specifically, her influence over you. Fabrini's position in the inner council depended on your emotional isolation. Men without strong personal attachments are easier to manage. They make decisions based on organizational logic instead of... He stopped. Instead of conscience, Damien said. His word, in one of the messages we recovered, was sentiment. He considered it a vulnerability. Corso turned a page. There are communications between Fabrini and 2 other council members, Renato Bale and Silvio Cren. Both of them were aware of the operation. All 3 agreed that the marriage needed to end before Celine became, this is a direct quote, a permanent structural problem. Damien did not move for a long time. He thought about the night the penthouse door that hadn't fully latched, Irina's laugh. And underneath all of it now, the understanding that none of it had been accident or weakness or the ordinary terrible human capacity for self-destruction. It had been a stage set, built by men who sat at his table and called him by his first name, and had decided that the woman he loved was a liability to be eliminated. "Where's Irina now?" he asked. "Prague. She's been there for about 3 years. She's not in any active arrangement with Fabrini anymore. Appears to have taken the money and removed herself from the situation." Corso closed the folder. "She might talk if approached carefully. She might also decide that talking is more dangerous than staying quiet." "We'll come back to Irina." Damien picked up the tablet. "Show me the Arden Security Group attacks." Corso swiped to a new set of documents. 4 incidents in 6 months. The first 2 looked like competitive intelligence, fairly standard industrial espionage, the kind of thing that happens in high-stakes contracting. The third was more serious, a coordinated breach attempt on their client database that their security team caught and repelled, but only barely. The fourth, he hesitated. Corso. The fourth was 3 weeks ago. A vehicle failure on a mountain road outside Zurich. Mrs. Arden was traveling with her son and 2 staff members. The brake system on the car failed on a downhill section. The driver managed to bring it to a stop by running it against the guardrail. He looked at Damien steadily. The brake line had been partially cut. Not fully. A full cut would have been obvious at inspection. Partially, so that it held through city driving and failed under sustained pressure on a grade. The air in the laundry corridor felt suddenly insufficient. "She was in the car," Damien said, "with Lucien." "Yes." And she attributed it to the investigation concluded mechanical failure. Her team has been quietly looking further, but they haven't connected it to the earlier attacks. And they haven't connected any of it to your organization. Corso put the tablet down. "Damien, if Fabrini's people escalate again, here at this summit, with this much at stake, the resources available to them are significant, and she has no idea the threat is coming from inside a structure connected to you." Damien pressed both hands flat on the folding shelf and breathed. His son had been in that car. His 5-year-old son, who didn't know he existed, had been on a mountain road outside Zurich 3 weeks ago in a vehicle with cut brake lines. The slow rage that had been sitting in his bones since the corridor that morning shifted into something that had no name he was comfortable using. It was beyond anger. It was the particular fury of a man who understands all at once the full scope of what has been taken from him. Not only the marriage, not only the years, but the near miss of something so catastrophic he couldn't let himself fully picture it. "I want Fabrini watched from this moment," he said. "Every communication, every contact. If he reaches out to anyone here in Geneva, anyone adjacent to this summit, I want to know within the hour." He straightened. "And I need you to find out who his operational people are on the ground. Not the council, the people who actually carry out the work. Names, locations. Now." "And Fabrini himself?" "Not yet." The restraint cost him something. He could see Corso registering the cost. "Not until I have the full picture. If we move on him now, and there are pieces we haven't found, the other pieces keep moving." "Yes." He picked up the folder and closed it and handed it back. "There's something else I need to do tonight." Corso looked at him. "I need to tell her," Damien said. "That's—" Corso chose his words carefully. "She's not going to receive that well." "No." "She may not believe you. From where she's standing, you showing up with information about a threat to her life is exactly what a man trying to manipulate his way back into her trust would do." "I know. There's also a version of this where you telling her alerts Fabrini's people that you're on to them if she reacts visibly." "I know, Corso." He met the other man's eyes. "I know all of that. I'm doing it anyway." Corso was quiet for a moment. Then, "Room number?" "I don't have it." "I'll find it." He picked up the bag. "Give me 20 minutes. It was 23 minutes before the text came through. Room 814. Damien took the stairwell to the 8th floor and stood outside the door for a moment with his hand raised to knock and thought briefly about the version of this conversation that went well. He couldn't construct one. Every scenario he ran ended with her either disbelieving him or believing him and being terrified, and he didn't know which outcome he dreaded more. He knocked twice. Quietly, because it was nearly midnight, and the corridor was silent. Nothing for a moment. Then a voice from inside, alert, not sleepy. Who is it? Damien. Silence. A longer silence than was comfortable. Then the sound of the security latch being drawn back, and the door opened to the width of the chain, which stayed on. She was in a dark sweater and what appeared to be the bottom half of a suit, like she'd half changed for bed and stopped. Her hair was down. It was the first time he'd seen it down in 5 years, and the sight of it did something to his composure that he couldn't afford, so he looked at her face instead. "It's midnight," she said. "I know. I need to talk to you. We said professional contact. Someone tried to kill you 3 weeks ago on a mountain road outside Zurich." He said it quietly, not dramatically, because the information itself was dramatic enough, and dramatizing it would make it sound like a manipulation. "The brake line on your car was cut." The chain didn't move for 5 seconds. Then she closed the door. He heard the chain slide free, and the door opened. She stepped back to let him in without a word. The room was a standard suite. Sitting area near the window, bedroom behind a half-open door. On the coffee table were 2 stacks of documents and a half-empty cup of tea that had gone cold. She had been working. Of course she had been working. She stood in the center of the sitting area with her arms crossed, not defensively. More like she needed to hold herself together while she processed. She was pale in the way people go pale when they're absorbing information that rearranges something fundamental. "The investigation said mechanical failure," she said. "The investigation was wrong, or it was pointed in the wrong direction." "By whom?" "People inside my organization." He said it straight. No softening. "Specifically, a man named Drago Fabrini, who sits on my inner council and has for 20 years. He watched her face. "Fabrini is also the person who arranged what happened 5 years ago, with Irina Vasek. That night wasn't an accident or a coincidence, it was constructed. He approached Irina over a year before, paid her, and set up the situation specifically to end the marriage." She stared at him. He watched her process it. The small, rapid movements behind her eyes that meant she was taking something apart, examining it, checking it against what she already knew. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that the night I came home and found—" She stopped. Started again. "You're telling me that was orchestrated?" "Yes." "By someone in your organization?" "Yes." "To isolate you?" "Yes." She unfolded her arms and sat down on the edge of the couch. Not because she wanted to sit, but because something in her legs made the decision for her. He stayed standing. The distance between them felt important to maintain. "That doesn't—" She pressed 2 fingers against the side of her face. "Even if that's true, you still made the choice. Someone can arrange a situation, and you still have to—" "I know." He said it before she could finish. "I know that. I'm not telling you this to excuse what I did. I'm telling you because the people who arranged it have spent 5 years watching you build something they consider a threat. And 3 weeks ago, they put your son in a car with cut brake lines and called it an accident." The sound she made was barely audible, something tight and controlled that in another moment might have become something else entirely. She pressed her hand flat against her mouth for a second and then took it away, and when she looked at him, her eyes were clear and very, very hard. "Lucien was in that car," she said. "I know. He was asleep in the back seat. He slept through the whole thing. He thought the noise against the guardrail was exciting." Her voice cracked on the last word, just slightly, then steadied. "I told him it was like a carnival ride." Damien sat down then too, because standing felt wrong. He sat in the chair across from her and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say in this particular 10 seconds, and he knew it. "How do you know all of this?" she asked. "I've had people digging for the past 24 hours, phone records, transaction logs, a photograph of Irina at one of Fabrini's offices 14 months before." He stopped. "Before you left." "Why now? Why start digging now?" "Because I saw you yesterday and spent the night thinking about why the affair happened. Something never fit about it. Irina reaching out after years of distance, the timing, He shook his head. "I was too busy being guilty to ask why. I just assumed it was my fault entirely, and it was still your fault." "Yes." He didn't flinch. "Fabrini built the stage. I walked onto it voluntarily. Both things are true." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the cold tea on the coffee table like she was considering picking it up and then deciding against it. "The cyber attacks," she said. The three before Zurich. Most likely connected. I'm having that verified tonight. I have a security team. I know. They're good. They missed the brake line. Her jaw tightened. What do you want me to do with this information? Right now, nothing visible. If Fabrini's people are watching you, and I have to assume they are, any change in your behavior signals that something has shifted. Keep presenting for the contract. Keep your schedule. Act like nothing has changed. And you'll do what exactly? Dismantle it from the inside. He said it without inflection. I know where the pieces are. I need a few days to locate all of them before I move, or the parts I haven't found disappear. She looked at him for a long time. You realize, she said carefully, that this is the exact story a man would construct if he wanted me to trust him enough to lower my guard. Yes. It's very complete. It explains everything in a way that's convenient for you. I know how it sounds. The affair wasn't your fault, at least not entirely. The disappearance was actually someone else's fault. And now you happen to have information that only you can act on, which requires me to trust you. She tilted her head slightly. If I were advising someone else in this situation, I would tell them to be very careful. That's good advice, he said. You should follow it. So why should I believe you? He thought about it. Not performing the thinking, actually thinking about what evidence he had that wasn't just his word. Corso has the physical files, phone records, the photograph, the transaction logs. You can have them verified independently. I'll give you everything we have and you can hand it to your own investigators without going through me. He held her gaze. If it's fabricated, your people will find the fabrication. If it's real, you'll know that too. She said nothing. Seraphine. He used the name deliberately this time, the name she had chosen, the name that belonged to the woman in front of him rather than the woman she'd been when he knew her. I understand why you don't trust me. I'm not asking for trust. I'm asking you to look at the documents. A long silence. Send them to my secure email, she said finally. I'll have my analyst look at them tonight. All right. And Damien. She stood, which was his signal to leave. If this is real, if Fabrini is behind the Zurich incident, you need to understand that I am not going to be managed through this. I won't sit quietly while you handle it. Lucien is my son. My company is my company. Whatever you decide to do about your organization, I will be making my own decisions about my own situation. I know. I'm not the woman who walked away into the rain, she said. I haven't been her for a long time. I can see that. Good. She walked to the door and held it open. The corridor light fell across her face, and for a second she looked tired in a way she hadn't allowed him to see before. Not weak, but human. Carrying something heavy that you do when you've been carrying it alone long enough that you've almost stopped noticing the weight. He walked to the door, stopped just inside the threshold. The tiny shoes, he said. He hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway. Margot Ellison told me, 2 years after you left, that you had been pregnant, that you'd had shoes in your bag. She went very still. I've thought about those shoes every single day since, he said, for 3 years. I don't know why I needed you to know that. Her face did something complex and private that she controlled before it became fully visible. Go get some sleep, she said. Her voice was steady. Send me the files. He stepped into the corridor. The door closed behind him. He stood in the silence of the 8th-floor hallway and breathed and thought about files and brake lines and a 5-year-old boy who had been on a mountain road 3 weeks ago, and about Drago Fabrini, who had been sitting at his table ever since. He pulled out his phone and sent the files. Then he called Corso. I need you to find Fabrini's ground operators, he said. Tonight, all of them. By 4 in the morning, Corso had 3 names. He delivered them to Damien's room with that same unhappy expression, which Damien was beginning to think was Corso's version of being deeply alarmed. The 3 names were men Damien knew. Not well, but enough to place them in the organizational structure. Mid-level, operational, the kind of men who received instructions and carried them out without needing the full picture. One of them was registered at this hotel, floor 6, under a name that wasn't his. He's here, Damien said, at the summit. Checked in 2 days ago, before you arrived. Before either of us arrived. He stared at the name on the registration printout. They weren't reacting to Celine being here. They knew she'd be here. They planned around the summit. Which means they've been watching her schedule for weeks. Which means this is not an improvised escalation. He set the paper down. The full shape of it was visible now, and it was worse than he'd constructed in the stairwell 12 hours ago. They were going to make a move here regardless. The contract negotiation gave them cover. A major incident at an international summit looks like business competition gone wrong. It doesn't look like organized crime eliminating a target. Corso sat down heavily in the chair by the window. Damien, we need to call someone. Not yet. International authorities. If we call authorities now, Fabrini disappears within 6 hours, and we lose the thread to everything else connected to him. He's been doing this for 20 years. He has escape infrastructure we haven't fully mapped. Damien pressed his fingers against his eyes. 2 more days. I need to identify every piece before I pull. 2 days is a long time if his man on the 6th floor is here to move on her. Then we watch him. He dropped his hands. Continuous surveillance. If he makes any move toward her floor, toward her scheduled events, toward anything connected to Arden Security Group, we intercept. With what? We've got you, me, and whatever I can pull together in the next 12 hours who aren't connected to Fabrini. How many can you get here? Maybe 4. Reliable ones. Corso looked at him. 4 isn't many if this goes loud. It won't go loud. Not their style. They want it to look like an accident, like business pressure. They won't bring in a team for a frontal assault at an international summit with 700 witnesses. Damien moved to the window. The city was beginning to gray at the edges, the particular colorless pre-dawn that happened before the light decided what it was going to be. They'll find something subtle, something that can be explained. Like a brake line. Like a brake line. He stood at the window for a moment. Below him, Geneva was quiet, the streets still mostly empty, the lake just visible at the edge of the city, flat and gray and very still. Lucien was asleep 2 floors above him. He thought about that. The proximity of it. The fact that his son, whom he had never spoken to, never held, never been in the same building with until yesterday, was sleeping 90 feet overhead in a room he'd never been invited into. He thought about Celine reading the files right now. Or maybe she had read them already and was sitting in that sitting room with the cold tea and the work documents, deciding what to do with information that reordered the story of the last 5 years. He thought about Drago Fabrini, asleep in his bed in Milan or in some hotel somewhere, confident that the pieces he had placed were working as intended. The thing about men who built elaborate structures of control was that they tended to assume the only variables they needed to manage were the ones they could see. They mapped the board and moved their pieces and forgot that the pieces had their own reasons. Fabrini had spent 20 years managing Damien by keeping him emotionally isolated. He had not accounted for the possibility that removing the isolation, that Celine walking back into a conference hall and looking at Damien across a room, would produce not grief and distraction, but something closer to the opposite. Something that had been dormant for 5 years and was now sitting in the gray pre-dawn of a Geneva hotel room, becoming the most dangerous thing Drago Fabrini had ever accidentally created. Damien turned from the window. "Get the 4 people here by morning," he said, "and find out if Fabrini himself is planning to travel." "You think he'd come here?" "I think he wants to watch," Damien said. "Men like him always want to watch the finish." He sat down at the desk and opened his laptop and began, methodically, to dismantle 20 years of infrastructure in the only way that would actually hold. Not through violence, not through fear, but through documentation. Every account, every shell company, every arrangement, every name. He had 2 days. He began to write. The cursor blinked against the white screen in the gray early morning, and outside the window Geneva slowly acquired color, and 90 feet above him a boy named Lucien slept without knowing that the man sitting at that desk had just made the most consequential decision of his life. Not for power, not for survival, but because some things, once you finally see their full shape, leave. He had been awake for 31 hours when the first text from Celine came through. It arrived at 6:47 in the morning while he was still at the desk with the laptop and 3 empty coffee cups and 17 pages of documented organizational structure that represented the skeleton of everything he had spent 15 years building. The text was 4 words. "The files are real." He stared at it for a moment. Then he typed back, "I know. I'm sorry." 3 minutes passed. Then, "Your man on floor 6 left his room at 6:15. My analyst flagged movement near the summit service corridor on the security feed. Where is Corso?" Damien was on his feet before he finished reading. He called Corso as he was pulling on his jacket. Corso picked up on the first ring, which meant he hadn't slept either. Floor 6, Damien said. I'm already on it. He moved 20 minutes ago. I've got Petrov and Segal on him. 2 of the 4 I pulled in overnight. Corso's voice was low and very controlled. The voice he used when things were actively happening and panic was a luxury neither of them could spend. He's not moving toward guest rooms. He's in the service infrastructure, basement level. What's in the basement? HVAC, electrical. The summit's AV systems for the main hall. A pause filled with background sound, footsteps, a door. Damien, the keynote presentation is in 4 hours. 700 people in the main hall. Seraphine Arden is the second speaker. The back of his neck went cold. Pull the fire alarm and clear the building, he said. If we pull the alarm now, Fabrini's people scatter and we lose them. We lose the documentation trail. We lose the ability to hand anyone to authorities with enough evidence to hold them, and in 6 months they rebuild and try again somewhere you won't see coming. If we don't pull the alarm and they've put something in the HVAC, Petrov is 30 seconds behind him. We'll know what he placed before we decide anything. Corso breathed. Stay available. Don't move yet. The call went to hold. Damien stood in the center of his hotel room with his jacket half on and thought about 700 people in a main hall and a 5-year-old boy who was somewhere in this building and a man in a basement who had 20 years of organizational loyalty to Drago Fabrini and nothing to lose. His phone buzzed. Celine, I'm taking Lucian to the lobby. Tell me what's happening. He called her instead of texting. She picked up immediately. Don't go to the lobby, he said. Too exposed. Is there a connecting door between your room and the next suite? Yes, the family suite. It's been empty since yesterday. Go through it. Lock both sides. Keep Lucien away from the windows and don't open the door for anyone until I call you. He could hear her moving, the soft sounds of a child being woken and gathered, a small voice saying something he couldn't make out. Seraphine. I'm moving, she said. Crisp. No panic. How bad? I don't know yet. Possibly very. Is Lucian specifically targeted, or is this about the presentation? I don't know. Both. Either. He hated saying it. Please just get him into that room. Already there. The sound of a lock engaging. Damien. A half-second pause. Be careful. She hung up. Corso came back on the line 40 seconds later. His voice had changed. Tighter, the words coming faster. Petrov got eyes on what he placed. It's not HVAC. It's the AV routing system. A beat. He patched something into the main presentation feed. Petrov thinks it's a signal override, the kind that can be remotely triggered to cut power to the entire hall simultaneously. Lights, screens, emergency systems on a 30-second delay. A blackout. A controlled blackout. 30 seconds of complete darkness in a sealed hall with 700 people. Corso let that land. That's not a mass casualty device. That's cover for a targeted extraction or a single targeted action. Someone in that room, in the dark, with 30 seconds and everyone else panicking. Seraphine. Second speaker, front of the room. Petrov needs to pull the device, Damien said. If he pulls it now, the man knows we're onto him and runs. Petrov pulls the device and then he takes the man down quietly. I don't care how. Service corridor, no witnesses. He does not reach a phone. Damien was already moving to the door. What floor is Fabrini on? Dead silence for 2 full seconds. Damien. Corso. What floor? He arrived 40 minutes ago. Private car. Service entrance. Corso sounded like a man delivering a verdict. Floor 10. He flew in from Milan last night. He had come to watch the finish. Damien opened his hotel room door and walked into the corridor and hit the elevator button and stood there with his heart doing something loud and irregular in his chest while the elevator took its time descending from the upper floors. He thought about what he had spent the night building. 17 pages of documentation, account numbers, shell company structures, the names of every cooperative arrangement, every protected official, every judge and inspector and port authority figure who had taken money. He had sent it to 2 places. An encrypted drive held by a lawyer in Zurich who had instructions to deliver it to international law enforcement if Damien did not check in within 48 hours, and to an investigative journalist he had never met, but whose published work on organized crime suggested she would know what to do with it. Once that documentation reached its destination, there was no recovering what it contained. He had made that choice at 3 in the morning with a cursor blinking in front of him, and he was not unmaking it now. The elevator opened. He got in and pressed 10. Floor 10 was quiet. Long corridor, identical doors, the particular held-breath silence of a hotel in the early morning before most guests were awake. Damien walked to room 1014, the room registered under the alias Corso had identified. And he didn't knock. He tried the handle. Locked. He stood for a moment. He had no key, no tool, no particular plan beyond the fact that Drago Fabrini was on the other side of this door and had been sitting inside Damien's life for 20 years, eating at his table, and had put a child in a car with cut brake lines, and Damien had run out of patience for strategy. He pulled out his phone and called the room's direct line. The number Corso had found in the hotel system. It rang 3 times. Then a voice Damien had heard at least 1,000 times across conference tables and late dinners, and the particular intimate misery of funerals, answered with a careful, "Yes?" "Open the door, Drago." A silence that had weight and texture. The silence of a man rapidly recalculating. "Damien." The name came out carefully. "I didn't know you were—" "Open the door." Another silence. Then the sound of the latch, and the door swung inward. Drago Fabrini was 61 years old and had the build of a man who had once been physically imposing and was now simply large, gone slightly soft at the edges, but still substantial. He was dressed, which meant he hadn't been sleeping. He stood in the doorway of a room that held a laptop, 2 phones, and a half-eaten room service plate, and he looked at Damien with the careful expression of a man trying to determine precisely how much was known. "You came a long way," Damien said. "Business," Fabrini said. "The Meridian contract." "Stop." Damien stepped into the room, and Fabrini moved back. Not quickly, not with obvious fear, but back nonetheless. The instinctive retreat of a man whose calculation is telling him that the person in front of him is not currently operating on calculation. "There's a man in the basement right now who works for you. He's been taken off the board. The device he installed in the AV system has been removed." He watched Fabrini's face. "Your operation here is finished." Fabrini was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, the careful performance of confusion giving way to something more honest. Not fear exactly, more like the expression of a chess player watching an opponent make an unexpected move and rapidly reassessing the board. "You've been busy," Fabrini said. 14 months, Damien said. "You spent 14 months building it. Irina, the setup, the timing. You thought about it very carefully." He took another step into the room. "The night she came home to surprise me. She had tiny shoes in her bag. Did you know that? She was going to put them on my desk with the ultrasound photo. I didn't find that out until 2 years later." His voice stayed even. The evenness was costing him. "She was 8 weeks pregnant, and she had a note she'd spent 3 weeks writing, and she came home that night to tell me we were going to have a child, and instead she watched what you arranged, and then she walked out into the rain and disappeared." Fabrini said nothing. "My son is 2 floors below us," Damien said. "He's 5 years old. He doesn't know I exist, because you decided that my wife was a structural problem." The last 2 words came out with a weight that bent the air in the room. "Say something, Drago? 20 years. Say something." Fabrini pulled in a slow breath through his nose. "You were becoming unreliable," he said. It was not an apology and it was not a denial. It was stated with the flat reasonableness of a man defending a business decision, and somehow that flatness was worse than anything else he could have said. "She was changing you, the way you made decisions, the tolerance for risk you used to have. It was softening. Men in your position cannot afford to be soft." "Men in my position." "You built something that required a particular kind of focus." Fabrini sat down on the edge of the bed, unhurried, like a man who has decided that the situation is what it is, and performance is no longer useful. "I protected that focus. For years. Everything you built, the unification, the infrastructure, the reach, none of that happens if you're distracted by domesticity. She was my wife. She was a liability." The room held that for a moment. Damien's hands, which had been at his sides, closed. He looked at Fabrini's face, the face of a man who had attended the wedding, had toasted the marriage with expensive wine, had sat at dinners where Celine passed plates and laughed at stories, and had spent 14 months building a machine to destroy her, and felt something move through him that had no clean name. 3 weeks ago, Damien said. Zurich, the brake line. Fabrini's jaw moved slightly. She came back, Fabrini said. She came back with a company that has the ear of people we need to manage. With a profile that she came back with my son in her car. The evenness broke, just slightly, just at the edge. You put my son in a car on a mountain road with cut brake lines. He's 5 years old. The child wasn't the target. He was in the car. Each word landed separately, the way Damien's words did when he had reached the furthest boundary of his control and was holding the line by will alone. He was 5 years old and he was in the car, and if that driver hadn't found the guardrail, he stopped, breathed. You don't get to tell me about targets. Fabrini was quiet. I sent documentation to a Zurich lawyer last night, Damien said. Everything, accounts, structures, arrangements, names, every judge, every official, every protected asset across every territory. It goes to international law enforcement in, he checked his watch, 37 hours if I don't cancel the delivery. A pause. I'm not going to cancel it. Fabrini went still in a specific way. The stillness of a man whose entire nervous system has just absorbed a shock and is running damage assessment. You'll go down with it, Fabrini said. Everything you're giving them includes you. I know. Prison, years of it, everything you built, is already gone. He said it simply. I burned it last night, 17 pages. It took 6 hours. He held Fabrini's gaze. I kept Lucian's mother safe for 24 hours. I'll keep her safe for the next 37 until that documentation reaches the people who need it. Then it's over and I'll answer for my part. He paused. So will you. Something crossed Fabrini's face that might have been, underneath everything else, a reluctant form of respect. Or possibly it was just the expression of a man recalibrating a total loss. You're serious, Fabrini said. Yes. After everything. Damien moved to the room's desk and picked up both of Fabrini's phones and put them in his jacket pocket. You're going to stay in this room. Corso is outside in the corridor. If you attempt to contact anyone or leave before I'm ready to hand you to the appropriate people, the documentation goes immediately instead of in 37 hours, and I'll make sure your name is the first one they read. He walked to the door. Damien. Fabrini's voice stopped him. It had changed, older, stripped of the reasonableness, something almost genuine underneath. Whatever you think, I did believe I was protecting what you built. Damien stood with his hand on the door. I know, he said. That's the worst part of it. He opened the door. Men like you always do. He stepped into the corridor. Corso was there, as promised, leaning against the wall with the specific stillness of someone whose job is to be a physical fact. Damien handed him Fabrini's phones. Stay on him, Damien said. Nobody in or out. I don't care what he says to you. Understood. Corso pocketed the phones without looking at them. Petrov has the basement situation handled. The other 2 ground operators, where are they? One is in a vehicle parked on the south side of the building. One we haven't located yet. Damien's jaw tightened. The one we haven't located. Could be off-site. Could be in the building somewhere we haven't covered. Corso's expression said what his voice didn't, which was that an unlocated operative with instructions from Fabrini and no way to reach his handler anymore was a specific kind of problem. I need to get to Celine. The presentation starts in 3 hours and 40 minutes. I know. He was already moving toward the elevator. Call me the second you find that third man. He hit the button for the 8th floor. She opened the connecting suite door before he knocked. She must have heard him in the corridor. She was dressed, fully, in the dark suit she had worn for the first panel, and her expression when she saw his face asked the question before she did. How bad? She said again. The same question as before. She had the particular quality of someone who has assessed a situation and decided that accurate information is more useful than protection from it. Fabrini is contained on floor 10. His basement operative is handled. There's a third man we haven't located. He stepped inside and she closed the door. The keynote presentation needs to be postponed or no. Immediate. No hesitation. Seraphine, if I pull out of the keynote, it signals to every committee member in that room that something is wrong with Arden Security Group. The Meridian contract is not worth your life. I know that. She looked at him steadily. But pulling out of a keynote presentation at an international summit over an unlocated threat that may not materialize is also not a decision I'm making on insufficient information. She crossed her arms. Where's Lucien? A small voice from the bedroom behind her. Mama? Then the sound of small feet, and the bedroom door opened, and a boy came out rubbing his eyes. Damien stopped breathing. He was small, the way 5-year-olds are small. The compact, solid smallness of a child who hasn't yet grown into the length of his own limbs. Dark hair that curled slightly at the back of his neck. The particular solemn expression of a child who has been woken up and is deciding whether to be upset about it. He looked at his mother first, then turned and registered Damien with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of someone for whom social caution hasn't yet been fully installed. Who are you? Lucien asked. The question was simple and devastating. Celine moved to the boy immediately, one hand on his shoulder, positioning herself in the half-protective way of a parent managing an unexpected situation. She looked at Damien over her son's head. It was the first time she had looked at him with something that wasn't composure. It was also the first time he had seen her look afraid. Not of Fabrini or the third operative or the unlocated threat somewhere in the building. Afraid of this moment, specifically. Of the particular fragility of what it contained. Damien crouched down to the boy's level because standing over a 5-year-old seemed wrong. My name is Damien, he said. He stopped. Looked up at Celine. She gave him nothing, not permission, not prohibition, just watching. I'm someone who knows your mother, he said, from a long time ago. Lucien considered this with the gravity of a small person for whom categorization matters. Are you her friend? He asked. I'm trying to be, Damien said. Lucien seemed to find this acceptable. He looked at his mother. I'm hungry. I know, baby. She steered him back toward the bedroom. Give me 2 minutes. She looked at Damien. Don't move. She went into this bedroom and he stood in the sitting area of the suite with the wall at his back and his heart doing something he had no framework for. The room was ordinary. Hotel suite furniture, the curtains letting in gray Geneva morning light, a stuffed animal abandoned on the couch. The stuffed animal was a bear, dark blue, worn at one ear from handling. He made himself look away from it. Celine came back out alone. She had fed Lucien something from the room service menu on the tablet and settled him back in the bedroom with it. And when she came into the sitting area, she closed the bedroom door and looked at Damien, and they were both quiet for a moment with the weight of what had just happened. He's never asked about you, she said. Her voice was low so it wouldn't carry. Not directly. He asked once when he was 3 why he didn't have a father, and I told him some children have one parent and some have 2, and both were fine. He thought about it and moved on. She paused. He accepts the world as it's presented to him. He's practical that way. He looks like you, Damien said. He has your hands. She said it matter-of-factly, not tenderly, just stating a thing she had apparently observed at some point and decided to carry without sentimentality. And your way of going very still when he's thinking. Damien had nothing to do with this information except absorb it. His phone buzzed. Corso. Found the third man. He's not in the building. He's across the street. Elevated position. He has a line of sight on the main hall entrance. His blood went cold. He turned the phone so Celine could read it. He watched her read it, watched her absorb it. She pulled in a slow breath through her nose, the breath of someone choosing their response instead of having it chosen for them. Sniper, she said. Yes. Not the presentation, the entrance. She was already thinking. He could see it, assembling information rapidly into a picture. I arrived through the main entrance with my team at 8:45. That's on the summit's public schedule. Yes. So he doesn't need to be inside. She looked at the window. He just needs to wait for 8:45. Corso can redirect you through the service entrance. If I redirect through the service entrance, he has a spotter who sees the deviation and alerts Fabrini. Her eyes came back to him. Does Fabrini still have his phones? No, I took them. Then the spotter can't reach Fabrini for new instructions. She thought for another 3 seconds. Corso needs to take the third man before 8:45. That gives us... She checked the clock on the wall. 92 minutes. That's tight. I know it's tight. She moved to the desk and picked up her own phone. I'm going to call the summit security director. I'll tell him there's been a credible threat communicated to my team, give him enough to act on without causing a full evacuation panic. His people can triangulate the elevated position Corso identified and deal with it officially. The moment you call official security, This becomes a law enforcement matter. Yes, she met his eyes. It should be a law enforcement matter. That's what law enforcement is for. It was a simple statement, and it landed on him with the full weight of the gap between her world and the one he had operated in for 15 years. The world where you handled problems internally, where official involvement was a last resort and usually a sign of failure. You're right, he said. She blinked, like she hadn't expected agreement. Make the call, he said. I'll coordinate with Corso on Fabrini so that when your security director's people start moving, there's already a contained situation on floor 10 for them to take custody of. She nodded and raised the phone to her ear. He sent Corso the instruction simultaneously. Summit security incoming within the hour. Have Fabrini ready for handoff. Documentation package to go to Director Holly at Interpol as supplementary. I'll send the contact. Corso's response took 4 seconds. Understood. This is it then. Damien looked at the response for a moment. Yes, he typed back. This is it. He put the phone in his pocket and stood in the hotel suite listening to Celine speak calmly and precisely into her phone, delivering information to the Summit security director in the measured tone of someone who has handled crises before and knows that precision is more useful than alarm. From behind the bedroom door, he could hear the faint sound of a children's program playing on the room service tablet. A small voice laughed at something. He stood very still and listened to his son laugh, and thought about 37 hours in documentation and the shape of everything that came next. And none of it was going to be easy or clean or without consequence. And he had known that at 3 in the morning when he started writing, and he had made his choice anyway. Celine lowered the phone. 12 minutes, she said. Security teams will be in position around the elevated location in 12 minutes. The director is taking it seriously. She looked at Damien. He wants to speak with you. About the internal information. About Fabrini. I know. It means, I know what it means. He met her eyes. I'll speak with him. She studied his face. You actually did it, she said. Quietly. Not a question. An observation. The expression of someone recalibrating something they had decided was no longer possible. The documentation, the organization, you actually… Yes. Why? She asked it directly, without the buffer of rhetorical distance. Not for me. I'm not asking you to say it's for me. Why? He thought about the honest answer, not the one that sounded best, not the one that cast him most favorably, the honest one. Because I was in a hotel room at 3 in the morning, and I thought about my son on a mountain road, he said. And I thought about what I was, and what I had been. And I thought… He stopped, started again. I thought, there is no version of this where I am the right thing for either of them to be connected to. Unless I stop. His jaw moved. So I stopped. She was quiet. In the corridor outside, the first sounds of Summit security teams moving reached them through the door. Controlled, professional, the sound of an institution beginning to respond. His phone began to buzz with Corso's updates arriving in sequence. And somewhere across the street, in an elevated position overlooking the main entrance of the hotel, a man with a rifle and instructions from a man who was no longer reachable was beginning to understand that the morning was not going to go the way he had been told it would, and that the window he had been given was… The man across the street was named Pavel Sutter, and he had been with Fabrini's operational network for 9 years without Damien ever learning his name. He was 43 years old, former military from a country that no longer existed under the name he had served. And he was sitting in a 4th-floor window of a commercial building across from the hotel with a rifle he had assembled from components carried in separately over 2 days. And he was beginning to understand that his phone was not going to ring. He had been given a window of 40 minutes beginning at 8:45. He had been told that confirmation would come at 8:40, 5 minutes before. He had been told not to move from position until confirmation arrived. 8:38 came and went. 8:40 came and went. The Summit security teams that hit the building's 4th floor came in from the stairwell and the window simultaneously at 8:42, and Pavel Sutter, who was a professional and knew the difference between a survivable situation and a non-survivable one, put his hands up before the first officer reached him, because 9 years of operational work had given him enough pattern recognition to understand that this particular morning had stopped being his. He was in custody before 8:45. The main entrance of the hotel stayed quiet. Celine Arden walked through it at 8:47 with two members of her team, on schedule, through a lobby that looked entirely normal to anyone who didn't know what the previous 90 minutes had contained. Damien watched her cross the lobby from a position near the concierge desk. She didn't look at him as she passed, but she slowed, almost imperceptibly, for exactly one step, a fractional hesitation that could have meant anything and that he understood completely. Then she walked into the conference corridor and disappeared. He let out a breath that he had been holding, it felt like, since 3 in the morning. The summit security director was a compact Swiss man named Frey, who conducted his interviews with the brisk efficiency of someone who considers emotional register an operational variable to be managed rather than a human quality to be engaged with. He sat across from Damien in a windowless room on the second floor with a recording device and two colleagues, and went through the information systematically, asking specific questions and recording specific answers, and Damien gave him everything he asked for without maneuvering or omission. It took 3 hours. At the end of it, Frey looked at his recording device and then at Damien with an expression that was not warm, but was perhaps marginally less cold than it had been at the beginning. "The documentation you've transmitted to Director Halley at Interpol," Frey said. "You understand that this material implicates you directly in numerous criminal enterprises across multiple jurisdictions." "Yes." "You transmitted it voluntarily, without legal coercion." "Yes." Frey looked at him for a moment. "Why?" Damien thought about how to answer that in a way that was honest without being either self-serving or self-flagellating. "Because I was the one who built it," he said, "and the people it was hurting were people I had no right to hurt." A pause. "And because my son was in a car 3 weeks ago with cut brake lines, and I decided that being the kind of man who lets that continue was worse than whatever came next." Frey considered this. He didn't comment on it. "You'll be required to remain in Geneva," Frey said. "Your passport will be held pending coordination with Interpol. A formal interview will be conducted within 48 hours. He closed his folder. "Mr. Vescari, the scope of what you've transmitted, if the information holds, this is a significant cooperation. It will be considered." "I'm not cooperating for consideration," Damien said. Frey looked at him. "I'm cooperating because it's what happens now," Damien said. "That's all." Frey nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man who has heard many things in many rooms and has learned to take most of them with appropriate skepticism, but occasionally encounters something that doesn't require it. "We're done for now," he said. "Don't leave the building." Drago Fabrini was taken from room 1014 at 10:15 in the morning by 4 officers, 2 of whom were Interpol liaisons who had been on a flight from Paris before the Geneva operation was even fully confirmed, because the documentation Damien had transmitted had been significant enough to move people quickly. Fabrini walked through the hotel corridor in handcuffs without visible distress, which was perhaps the most revealing thing about him. The composure of a man who has operated inside systems of power for so long that even the collapse of one feels, to him, like simply another system processing. He passed Damien in the corridor. He stopped. The officers on either side paused. The 2 men looked at each other. Fabrini said, "For what it's worth. I never thought it would go as far as the child." Damien looked at him for a long moment. "That's not worth anything," he said. Fabrini nodded once, accepting this, and kept walking. Damien watched him go. He thought he would feel something larger, rage completing itself, or satisfaction, or the particular relief of a weight lifted. Instead, he felt tired. The deep specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something corrosive for a long time and has finally set it down and now has to reckon with what carrying it has cost. Reyes found him 20 minutes later in the hotel's small garden terrace, where Damien had gone not because he particularly wanted air, but because he needed a space without walls for 10 minutes. Reyes sat down across from him without being invited and said nothing for a moment, which was one of the things Damien had always valued about him, the ability to gauge when words were useful and when they weren't. "The Meridian contract," Reyes said eventually. "Withdraw our bid." Reyes absorbed this. "Damien, the organization that bid on it doesn't exist anymore. We can't fulfill a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure contract with a structure I've just handed to Interpol." He looked at the garden, which was small and manicured and entirely indifferent to the morning's events. "Withdraw. Do it cleanly and cite internal restructuring. Don't make it dramatic. And the legitimate holdings, the firms that aren't, those survive. Most of them can operate independently. They were always more separate from the infrastructure than people assumed. He rubbed the side of his face. He needed sleep. He needed, possibly, a week of sleep. I'll need you to stay on for the transition. 6 months, maybe a year. Help me dismantle what needs dismantling and protect what can be protected. What about you? Reyes asked. Personally? What happens to you? I answer for what I did. He said it simply. There will be a process. It'll take time. I'll cooperate with everything they ask. Prison is possible. Prison is likely. He didn't look away from the garden. I know that. Reyes was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, he said, and then stopped. Don't, Damien said. I was going to say you look better than you have in 5 years. Damien looked at him. Reyes shrugged slightly, the shrug of a man who has just said a true thing and is neither embarrassed nor particularly invested in how it's received. You looked like a man carrying a building, Reyes said, for years. Even when you were functioning, even when you were effective, something was off. Like the weight distribution was wrong. He paused. You look lighter. Wrecked, obviously, but lighter. Damien thought about that. Go withdraw the bid, he said, but not harshly. The keynote session ran from 9 to 11. Damien did not attend. He had no reason to attend, and several reasons not to, including the fact that his presence in any public session connected to the summit would be, given the morning's events, a distraction neither the summit nor Seraphine needed. He heard from Corso, who had watched the session from the back of the hall, that she presented her platform for 41 minutes and answered questions for 20, and that the committee chair had shaken her hand afterward with the particular warmth of someone who has already made a decision and is simply completing the appropriate formalities. Arden Security Group was going to win the Meridian contract. Damien sat with that information in the garden for a while. He found he felt something that surprised him. Not resentment, not grief about the business loss, which was the smallest of what had been lost. Something closer to rightness. The particular satisfaction of an outcome that fits the shape of what is deserved. She had built something extraordinary from the materials of devastation. She had taken the worst thing he had ever done, involuntarily or not, and transformed it into the foundation of something real. The contract was hers because she had earned it in ways that had nothing to do with him. That was good. That was how it should be. He thought about the tiny shoes on a kitchen table in an apartment he had never known about. He thought about the note she had written. We're 3 now. I thought you should know. He closed his eyes. She found him in the garden at noon. She came out through the glass door from the lobby corridor, still in the dark suit from the morning, and she looked at him across the small space with the particular directness that had characterized every interaction they'd had this week. The look of a woman who has decided that indirection costs too much, and she can no longer afford it. She sat down across from him, not beside him, across. The table between them felt intentional, and he respected it. The committee chair spoke to me after the session, she said. They're awarding the contract to Arden Security Group, pending final confirmation next week. I know, Corso told me. Congratulations. He meant it. She could see that he meant it, and something in her face acknowledged this without making a production of it. You withdrew your bid, she said, an hour ago. Reyes told my team. He said internal restructuring. She looked at him. Is that what we're calling it? It's accurate. Damien. She put her hands flat on the table between them. Small gesture, grounding. What happens to you now? I speak to Interpol. I cooperate fully. The legal process takes as long as it takes. He paused. I've spoken to an attorney. Given the scope of cooperation and the nature of the information, there's a range of possible outcomes. Prison is in that range. I'm not making a prediction. I know a good attorney, she said, in Geneva. She's done this kind of cooperation case before. He stared at her. I'm not offering to fix it, she said quickly. I'm not offering to make it easier than it is. I'm offering a name, that's all. Why? She looked at the garden for a moment. Because you spent the night dismantling your own organization to keep our son safe, she said, and you handed Fabrini to people who can actually hold him, instead of handling it in the way you would have handled it 2 years ago. She looked back at him. I'm not giving you credit for basic decency, but I'm not pretending it costs nothing either. He was quiet. The attorney's name is Kessler, she said. I'll send you her contact. Thank you. A silence that was not comfortable but was honest. The silence of two people who have been through enough that they no longer need to perform ease they don't feel. I want to tell Lucien, he said, not now, not this week, but eventually. When there's something to tell him that isn't just an explanation of disaster. He looked at her hands on the table. When I've done enough that the introduction doesn't require an apology as its foundation. She thought about that for a long moment. He could see her turning it over the way she turned over everything, carefully, seriously, checking it from multiple angles. He deserves to know who he is, she said finally. All of who he is. A pause. That doesn't mean the timing is now, or that I control the timeline unilaterally. Another pause, smaller. We'll figure it out. We. The word was small and precise, and he did not make the mistake of treating it as more than it was. All right, he said. She stood. He stood because it seemed right. They were the same height when she wore heels, which she did, and they stood on opposite sides of a garden table in a Geneva hotel in the late afternoon of a day that had started with a man in a basement and ended with something that had no clean category. The life you built, he said. Seraphine Arden, the company, all of it. I looked for Celine for 3 years and I never found her. And in 5 years she built something I found impossible to overlook at an international summit. He held her gaze. You should know that I'm proud of that. Not in a way that I have any right to, just as a fact. What you built is extraordinary. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said. Not arrogantly, just accurately. The statement of a woman who has stopped waiting for outside confirmation and has been her own authority for long enough that she no longer needs to be modest about it. She picked up her bag. Get some sleep, Damien. You look terrible. She walked back through the glass door. He stood in the garden and watched her go, and the afternoon light came through the hotel's upper windows and put a stripe of gold across the empty chair where she had been sitting, and he stood there until it moved. The months that followed did not arrange themselves into a clean narrative. They rarely do. The Interpol process was lengthy and often deeply unpleasant in the specific way that legal processes are unpleasant, not dramatic, just grinding, full of documents and depositions and the slow grinding work of accountability made administrative. Damien cooperated with everything. He did not maneuver or minimize or attempt to construct a version of events that served him better than the truth. His attorney, not Kessler, in the end, though he had called her and she had recommended a colleague better suited to his jurisdiction, told him repeatedly that his cooperation was extraordinary in scope and would likely be reflected in the outcome. He told her he wasn't doing it for the outcome. She told him that was admirable, and also that she was going to pursue the best outcome regardless, because that was her job, and he said fair enough. Fabrini was charged in 3 jurisdictions. Bale and Kren, the other council members who had known about the operation against Celine, were located and charged within 60 days of the Geneva summit. Irina Vasek, in Prague, cooperated with investigators after a conversation with a woman from Interpol who had, by all accounts, a gift for making people understand that their best option was honesty. Irina received a reduced arrangement. She sent no communication to Damien, and he expected none. The criminal organization that had taken 15 years to build took 18 months to fully dismantle in the legal sense. Most of it was paperwork. Some of it was testimony. A small portion of it was the particular grief of watching things you built, some of which had been genuinely useful, some of which had been genuinely harmful, most of which had been some complicated mixture, reduced to line items in a legal filing. Damien served 14 months. The facility was not brutal. It was also not comfortable, and he did not pretend it was something other than what it was. He read. He exercised because the routine of it was useful. He slept better than he had in years, which he found ironic and did not examine too closely. Celine. Seraphine in all the contexts that mattered to the world, though in his own mind she remained both. The way a person can contain 2 names, like 2 chapters of the same life, sent him a letter 3 months into the sentence. Not long. 2 pages, handwritten, in the careful script he had forgotten she had. She wrote about Lucien mostly. Small things. A thing he had said at school that had made her laugh. A drawing he had made that she described in enough detail that Damien could almost see it. a question the boy had asked about why rivers kept moving and whether they ever got tired. She wrote at the end, "He asked me yesterday if you were real. I told him yes. He thought about it for a while and then asked if he could write you a letter. I said I would ask you first. Let me know." Damien sat with that letter for 2 days before responding. He wrote back, "Yes, yes, please, tell him there's no rush and he doesn't have to if he changes his mind. But yes." Lucian's letter arrived 6 weeks later. It was written in the large, careful letters of a child who is still negotiating the relationship between what he wants to say and what his hand is capable of producing. It said, "My name is Lucian. My mom said you know that. I am 5. I like blue. I have a bear named Marco. Mom said you live far away right now. I hope it is okay there. I drew you a picture of a fish. Do you like fish? I like them, but I don't like eating them." There was a drawing attached. The fish was ambitious in concept and impressionistic in execution, and it was colored entirely in blue. Damien sat in his cell and looked at it for a long time. He wrote back the next day. He told Lucian that he liked fish very much, both looking at them and not eating them, and that he thought Marco was a good name for a bear. He asked what Lucian's favorite color was besides blue. He drew a fish back, which was worse than Lucian's fish by a significant margin, and said so, which made him hope the boy would find it funny. They wrote back and forth 7 more times before the sentence ended. The day Damien was released was a Tuesday in October, early enough in the morning that the light was still working out what it wanted to be. His attorney was there. Reyes was there, which surprised him, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Reyes had stayed through the transition, 18 months of it, and had managed the legitimate holdings with a steadiness that Damien had not expected and was genuinely grateful for. There was no one else, and he hadn't expected anyone else, and that was fine. He stood outside the facility in the morning air with a bag that held everything he'd had when he went in, which wasn't much, and he thought about where he was going. He had arranged a place, a house outside the city, not the city where the penthouse was, which he had sold the year before, both because he needed the liquidity for legal costs and because he could not think of a version of his life in which he still lived in that penthouse. A smaller place. Stone walls, a small garden, a kitchen that was not designed to impress anyone. He had arranged it through Reyes months before and had never seen it in person. He was thinking about the garden when his phone, returned with his other belongings that morning, showed a text. It was from Celine. "Lucian wants to know if you're out today. I may have let it slip that it was today. He has been very focused on the fish question since your last letter." Damien stood outside the facility in the October morning and read this and read it again. He typed, "I'm out. Tell him yes, I am out, and I will write him a proper letter this week from an address he can actually write back to. 3 minutes. Then, he wants to know if you can call instead. He says letters take too long." Those are his words, not mine. He stood very still. Then he typed, "Whenever you're ready, both of you." The reply came faster this time. "Saturday, noon. We'll call you." He put the phone in his pocket. Reyes was watching him with the expression he had worn in the garden in Geneva, calibrated to the exact level of warmth that was appropriate without being excessive. "Good news?" Reyes said. "Come on," Damien said. "Let's go." Saturday arrived with the particular nervous quality of days that contain something you've been waiting for long enough that the waiting has become part of your daily texture, and you're not entirely sure how to function without it. Damien was in the small stone house by then. He had spent 3 days learning the specific geography of it, which floorboard made noise, where the light came in best in the mornings, the particular sound the garden made when wind moved through it in the afternoon. He had bought groceries and a coffee maker and a lamp for the bedroom, and he had not bought anything else because he wasn't sure yet what this version of his life needed, and he wanted to find out slowly. He had not bought a television. He had bought books. He was reacquainting himself with the particular pleasure of reading without purpose. At noon on Saturday, he sat at the kitchen table with his phone in front of him and waited. It rang at 12 after 12, which was close enough to noon that he understood the delay was probably Lucian having difficulty sitting still for 12 minutes. He answered. "Hello?" he said. A small voice immediately. "Is that you, the fish man?" Something seized in his chest and let go. "That's me," he said. "The fish man." "Mom says your fish drawing was bad," Lucian said, with the candor of a child who has not yet learned that this kind of statement requires softening. I thought it was okay. It looked like a fish. Mostly. Mostly is the best I can do. That's okay. I'm not good at horses. Mom is better at horses, but she doesn't like drawing them. A pause. Do you have a garden? I do. Does it have a pond? No, just plants. You should get a pond. Then you could have fish that you look at and don't eat. This was delivered with the tone of a person presenting an obvious solution to an obvious problem. Are you coming to see us? And there it was. Straight and simple and without armor. The way children ask the things that adults spend years learning to approach sideways. Damien pressed his free hand flat on the kitchen table. I'd like to, he said. If your mom thinks it's a good time, and if you want me to. I want to see if you're tall. A rustling sound like the phone being shifted. Mom says I have your hands. I want to see if that's true. I'd like to see that too, Damien said. His voice was not entirely steady. Celine's voice came on then, quieter, from a slight distance. The sound of someone who has handed a phone to a child and is now reclaiming it. Hey, she said. Hey, he said. A brief, ordinary silence. He's been drawing fish for 2 weeks, she said. I want you to know the refrigerator is completely covered. I'm sorry. Don't be. Most of them are better than yours. That's fair? He exhaled. Seraphine. I know, she said. Which covered, he thought, approximately everything that still needed to be said between them, and might, over a long enough stretch of time and enough honest effort on both sides, become the foundation of something he didn't have a word for yet. Not reconciliation. That word carried too much the implication of restoration, of returning to a prior state, and there was no prior state worth returning to. Something new. Built from what remained after everything that couldn't survive had burned away. Saturday works, he said, whenever you're ready. A few weeks, she said. Lucian has a school thing next weekend. After that, he said. They said goodbye and he stayed at the kitchen table after the call ended, the phone still warm from the conversation, the garden just visible through the window, the afternoon light moving across the stone floor in the slow way of light that has nowhere particular to be. He sat there for a while. He thought about a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows. He thought about 15 years of building something that had required him to be a particular kind of man, and how completely that man had failed the one test that turned out to matter. He thought about 48 hours in Geneva that had cost him almost everything and saved the one thing he hadn't understood was worth saving until he came very close to losing it permanently. He thought about a boy on the other end of a phone who wanted to compare hands and had fish drawings on a refrigerator and had asked, with the directness of someone who hasn't yet learned that directness is supposed to be frightening, whether the fish man was coming to visit. Outside the window, the garden was quiet and unremarkable and entirely his own, and the afternoon light kept moving, and Damien Vescari sat in the kitchen of a small stone house and felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, the specific and unexpected weight of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Not happy, exactly. Not at peace, exactly. Both of those words suggested a kind of resolution that life didn't actually offer. But present, awake, facing the right direction. That was enough. That was, he had finally learned, more than enough. End.